Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Doctor Who Guide. Today, I'm super excited to be joined by a very special guest, a fellow writer and contributor to Transference Distributors' 1997 Doctor Who Annual. Paul Burns, thank you so much for joining me today. You wrote the short story in the 1997 Annual Manhattan Transference. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a huge honor to be invited onto this. Brilliant.
Thank you so much for saying that. That's amazing. So, it's so cool to have stories together in the 1997 annual. Before we dive into that, I want to know, where can people find you on social media? Do you have, I believe it's what, Facebook and Twitter, right?
Yeah. You can find me on Facebook under my name, Paul Burns, and you can find me on Twitter. My handle is at MeerkatPB, which is MEerkatPB.
Awesome. Those will be linked in the description down below. Both having written for the 1997 annual, I thought it was ironic. So you're from the UK. If you don't mind sharing, where exactly, what whereabouts roughly in the UK are you from?
Well, I'm in what is termed South London, so I'm in a place called Croydon, which is a very nice place to drive straight through.
So wait, wasn't that where Sarah Jane was supposed to be dropped off?
Indeed, it was. And where did she end up? Was it Scotland where he
Aberdeen,
left her?
Aberdeen,
Aberdeen.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.
I don't blame you for leaving her in Aberdeen because that's exactly where I'd go if I had the choice as well.
Amazing. Doing her a favor, maybe. So you're from the UK. You wrote a story
Yeah.
set in the US. I'm from the US. I wrote a story set in well, in the TARDIS. But I thought that was very ironic. Both myself and the artist who illustrated my story, The Edge of Oblivion, Chris, are both from the US. So we were the two US contributors, and I found it somewhat ironic that we weren't the ones writing the story about set in Manhattan. So have you ever been to New York?
I have. In fact, it was the very first place I went to after I got onto a plane. So I had a terrible year in 1997. I'd split up with someone and I wanted to get away from everything. And so I said to my friend, let's just go somewhere. Never been on a plane, got on a plane. First place we went to was New York. And then we went to San Francisco afterwards. It was an amazing trip. I've grown up with New York in comic books, Spider-Man in particular. You would see scenes of him going over all the tall buildings in Manhattan and going over the bridges and seeing the yellow taxi cabs. And it was an amazing place, but it was all fantasy until you got there. And it just absolutely took my breath away. It's my absolute favorite place on earth. And to write a story set in my favorite place on earth was fantastic.
That's amazing because you kind of on that trip, you hit up New York, which has been the setting for a lot of, there's not many Doctor Who stories set in the U.S., but New York, I mean, the Angels take Manhattan, the Daleks in Manhattan, evolution of the Daleks, and then also San Francisco, where the TV movie, is set with the Eighth Doctor. You also went there as well, so that's very, very cool. You had a very, very good picks there as well. I mean, the only other
I think you'll
place would have
find
been
I've
what?
probably written the best story set in New York.
Amazing. I think you have as well. I think you have as well.
So thank you.
Speaking of your story, it's one that's right at the front of the annual, and I really did enjoy reading it, and I'm so glad that I get to talk with you about it today. Just if somebody hasn't yet gotten the annual and you wanted to give them like a spoiler-free, kind of pitch of your story, how would you pitch Manhattan Transference?
I would pitch Manhattan Transference by saying the Doctor, Stacy, and Sard arrive in New York. It's in the mid 90s. They attend a concert by the Space Girls, which is kind of a riff on the Spice Girls. And they discover a monster hidden in Madison Square Garden. And then they discover that these monsters are in league with a certain character from the Doctor's past.
Oh my gosh. We'll get into that a little bit further into the interview. That's a great pitch. Thank you for sharing that with us. This story kind of developed, was it from your experience in New York? Did you know that that was what you were going to write about? Are you a huge
I shall tell you
spice?
exactly how. I shall tell you exactly how it started. It started with the title, Manhattan Transference, which for you guys in the US probably don't know. But there was a group in the 70s called Manhattan Transfer, who had a number one record over in the UK called Chanson d'Amour. It's one of my favourite records. It's very, very cheesy, very kitsch. And to take their group name, Manhattan Transfer, and then add on the ents to it was just too tempting. So it all started with the title. And of course, if you call it Manhattan Transference, it's got to be set in New York. And it's got to feature characters who up until this point had only been featured in the Radio Times comic strips, and so I essentially had a blank canvas to work from. And it allowed me to flesh out the characters of Stacy, not necessarily Sard, because in my original story, Sard didn't feature. He wasn't there
Ah,
at all. And I was told at the very, very last minute that he had to be included, which I thought, okay, you've had this story for quite a long time now, and now you're telling me he's got to be included all the way through the story. I managed to do it, and it actually turned the story even better. The conclusion, in particular, made it much more emotional by including Sard in it. So they kind of did me a favor.
that's incredible. I mean, in a long tradition of Doctor Who writers, you have had to, write a script and then find out that there's a new companion, or a different companion entirely, or a new
Well,
Doctor. And
I knew that Sard was in the TARDIS, but I was kind of told that it was early on in the Doctor and Stacey's relationship, and so Sard wasn't featured yet. So I thought, well, that's okay. So I wrote the story without him being involved, and then all of a sudden, no, he's got to be included. So I
right, right.
managed. I worked it all out.
I think you did an amazing job pivoting like that. I could not tell from reading the story. There are some episodes of Doctor Who, certain novelizations, where you can kind of tell that the writers have written it originally, like with Time in the Ronnie, Pip and Jane Baker had to like reformat their script that they'd originally written for the Sixth Doctor with the now newly regenerated Seventh Doctor. So I think you did a great job, and it is interesting sometimes how you can tell certain characters have been given like split up. The one companion's original lines get split up between two. That happened a lot when Jamie came onto the series and wasn't originally supposed to be there. Three companions can be well, three characters, one doctor, two companions can be a lot to manage, but I thought that you did it very well. You mentioned the Space Girls instead of the Spice Girls. Is that also, and your love of music in the title? Are you a big Spice Girls fan, or
I shouldn't admit that, should I? I really shouldn't. But yeah,
was
they
it? It
made
was
some
just
great
for the
pop
pun.
music. Well, it was that as well. But yeah, they made some great pop music, and I needed a venue where there was going to be a lot of people, a lot of human beings. So obviously Madison Square Garden, and then you think, well, what would it be? Would it be a sporting venue? And you think a sporting event, and you think, no, I don't know anything about sports, so I know about pop music. Let's do a riff on the Spice Girls. So there we are.
Brilliant, brilliant. Were there any other references or hints that you weaved into the story? I mean, I know that we'll kind of head into the a spoilery section later, but so obviously there's that richness there. But were there any other like music references or New York references that you know weaved into the story?
Well, yeah, kind of at the end, the Doctor and Stacey and Sard go off to Statue of Liberty. Madison Square Garden, Times Square is mentioned as well. Central Park is where Sard spends most of his time. So yeah, I kind of wanted to weave in all those iconic sort of landmarks into the story, because if you're going to have a story called Manhattan Transfer, for instance, there's got to be places in New York where the characters go to. It made sense.
Right, right. It's funny you mentioned Spider-Man flying throughout all of those buildings and stuff, and I recognize Times Square, mostly my reference point is actually from the Lego Marvel games that my brother and I used to play, because their whole like menu that you play as characters and swing around, fly around is Times Square, and so I
Times
legitimately
Square is a
found that
crazy, crazy place. It's so busy, and yet
it
it's
is
the very hub of Manhattan.
right.
I mean, you look behind you when you're sort of got your back to Times Square, and you see all the huge buildings in the distance, and you think, I really have walked onto a film set. It's absolutely incredible. I absolutely love the place.
Yeah, I mean it really is. And actually it was Central Park that was for the game. But yeah, absolutely. It was so fun, and it is one of those places like with London that you kind of think, okay, the Doctor would definitely have ended up there multiple times. And it's a nice thing when you're writing a story for Doctor Who. I think the most it's very challenging when you have a new planet, you have a new alien species, you have something that's oppressing the alien species, or that they're oppressing, and to write all of that in, it requires a lot of exposition. It can be a challenge. You can do it well, but it can be a challenge. So I think some of the most successful Doctor Who stories have taken that third reference point, like New York, but also like, Pyramids of Mars. We have all this common knowledge as touchstone of, the lore around mummies, or, when we have Doctor Who meets Frankenstein or Doctor Who meets vampires, we don't need a lot of, exposition, because it's something that is just known in our psyche. So I think that that makes for a very successful Doctor Who story, because you can spend less time with exposition. And I mean, imagine if you had to explain New York to, I suppose they were explaining New York a little bit to Sard, but Stacy knew what it was, and the Doctor knew what it was, and so that
I
saved
think
you time.
I think it's quite rare to have anybody who doesn't know what New York is like. I think it's because
Yeah.
it's been so represented in films and TV and comics and loads of other places. I think people know exactly what it's like there. But to go there, to experience it, you need to go there and be in the middle of it. It's amazing.
Right, absolutely. And so when you see the artwork when you first got the book, or were you sent a preview? So when you first saw the book?
Yeah, no, I'm very good friends with, well, actually, two of the artists now. Not so much when the art was being done, but Richard Gareth Jones, who provides the backgrounds for the story. He and I are very good friends. We've known each other for a while, and so I got sneak peeks of what was going in the book, and I was absolutely blown away. And the figure work was done by Andrew Parsons, who I've subsequently become friends with, and he did a fantastic job as well. I was blown away by his images of certain characters, which we won't go into until we get to the spoilers. But
Yeah.
yeah, both of them did an amazing job, and it's such a thrill. I've written Doctor Who stories before, and they've been published in books, but with no artwork. To see my stories brought to life by this fantastic artwork and see it all come together and see it actually printed in the book was such a thrill. It was, growing up as a Doctor Who fan, you never think you get to write stories that would actually be published. You never get to think that. You think somebody else does that, somebody else cleverer and more and wiser, who knows more about the program, does that. And to see your story in a book is just breathtaking. It's brilliant.
That feeling is like no other. It really is so special and amazing. And
It is.
I did get the honor of interviewing Andrew Parsons as well.
I
So we'll
saw it.
link
It
to
was a
that.
wonderful interview.
It was so much fun. We'll link to that in the description down below. And like this book, like you're saying, is so full of vibrant and incredible artwork, that it was just a joy to flip through, but also to see your own story. And I'm sure we all like flip through as authors and probably artists, flip through to our pages first, and then explore the
Of
rest of
course, we're going to do that.
the how could you
That's the whole
not,
point
right?
of doing it.
That's where I was like, originally when I started doing this interview series, I was worried that some people would say no, and then I realized we all want to share and talk about this exciting thing that we're on this journey of contributing to. Had you mentioned previous writing projects for Doctor Who. What were those?
I started writing Doctor Who stories during lockdown because, let's face it, we all had things, we all had time to do these kind of things. And it started off by a short story called Like a Friend, which was published in the Doctor Who Appreciation Society magazine called DWAS, called Cosmic Mask. I had to remember that now. I nearly forgot. It was a magazine called Cosmic Mask, and it was printed in there. And it was just going to be a short story where a girl with mental health problems goes down onto a beach. She meets a sea devil. He's probing her for information about the human race. And he gets all this information in this little orb thing that they have on the end of their hands. But at the same time, it was kind of curing her or helping her with her mental health issues. So he was doing her a favor, but she didn't know that he was gaining information. So they kind of had like a symbiotic relationship where they were doing each other good. And it just ended there. The magazine editor, Steve Hatcher, said, "Well, what happens next?" I said, "Nothing happens next. That's it." And he said, "No, I've got to know what happens next. What is this sea devil going to do with this information? What's going to happen to this girl?" So I thought, well, I hadn't intended to write more, but I did, and the story wrote itself. And the 13th Doctor became involved, and she met up with Jo Jones, and she met up with the Sea Devils once again, and they had a big battle, and everything was resolved. And that turned into like a trilogy where the 13th Doctor also met David Bowie at the Blitz Club in the UK in 1980. That story was called Scary Monsters, of course. What else could it be called if David Bowie was involved? And also, there was a story in between Scary Monsters and what turned into Devil's Keep, which is the ongoing story of the Sea Devil. And that was an in between story called Time on Their Hands, where the 13th Doctor goes down into the sort of tunnels of the TARDIS. And I wrote that all the scenes of the TARDIS, everything that happens in the TARDIS was recorded on videotape. So I had this like alien worm who turned these tapes into reality. And so the 13th Doctor meets the first Doctor. And the joy of that was the interplay between the two, and I heard their voices in my head. And, the first Doctor was calling her a deluded young woman and that kind of thing. So that was a joy. So from then on, my mind started firing on all cylinders to create Doctor Who stories. And I've kind of written for mostly every Doctor. I haven't written an 11th Doctor one yet, and also 5th Doctor. I haven't done them, but mostly every other Doctor I've written stories about. And writing stories is just a creative outlet. It's just an amazing place to let your imagination run wild, and also to flesh out the stories that maybe didn't get enough airtime on television, and certainly the characters that didn't get enough airtime. And there was a book called Shadow of the Gallifreyan, which is an anthology, which I have here, Shadow of the Gallifreyan, which I've written 15 stories in. And what it is, it's characters who were left behind by the Doctor after the episode's finished. So I've got Samantha Briggs from the Faceless Ones, and she's in a care home now, and she's writing her biography. And the 13th Doctor pays a visit, and the 13th Doctor finds her family, and they're reunited. So it's nice to take those characters that didn't get enough airtime and just give them a bit more to do outside of the confines of the television series. So yeah, I've written loads more than that, but that's the one I'm most proudest of is a story called The New Doctor, which was published. It's like self-promotion, this. So you may have heard Temporal Lockup 3. Yeah. There's a story called The New Doctor in it, where the Doctor meets a young trans woman, and they essentially swap places. And that came about with me hearing the 12th Doctor's speech to the bereaved, gave the game away, but the bereaved mother in that story. I had that conversation in my head, and that's where the story grew from. So I could hear Peter Capaldi delivering all these lines and him being a bit stern and a bit cross with her, but ultimately sympathetic. And it kind of wrote itself. And then I wrote a story around that. And it was a huge honor and a privilege to write a trans character as well, because at the moment the viciousness of the anti-trans nonsense online is just it's so depressing and so upsetting. So to write a positive trans character in that book was a huge honor and a privilege.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
you didn't expect that long answer, did you?
No, that's incredible, and this is what I want is to you know have that moment to highlight all of these amazing contributors, but also to have you share everything that you've done. That's amazing, and thank you for sharing that. That's so cool. This kind of idea that I have behind this interview series is that you know I think that there's so much Doctor Who merchandise out there that at the end of the day, unless you have unlimited amounts of money and a wallet that's bigger on the inside, you have to pick and choose. And so I think that for me, once I've gotten to know an author that I've interviewed, then there's this connection there, and I start to like say, okay, well, I'm going to prioritize their releases that are coming out, or their
I've just given you
stories,
two
and
now. Go online and order them. They're brilliant.
right, right. And, you know, so I think that once people get to know somebody, that can be a legitimate way to market this stuff, because otherwise it's decision fatigue. We can share the cover, and one of the things that's a little bit tricky too is that you don't want to give away so much about the entire book, the
Yeah,
entire annual, that you want people to go and to get it and collect it. It's so exciting. So I love being able
it's
to
a
like
balancing act of self promotion and keeping things secret,
secret,
so that it's a
right?
surprise when you read it.
Exactly, exactly. It's that balancing act that you're talking about. And so I love that people are getting to, add a face, a voice, a personality to these, what would be a very long list of names in the annual. And so it's been very exciting to get to meet people. Why don't we now dive into kind of a little spoilery section? So if you haven't gotten the annual yet, which you
Switch
absolutely
off.
should, but yes,
Oh,
we
you see,
will.
you've got that cover, and I've got the other cover.
Oh,
You see,
brilliant! Yes,
which
yes,
I
and
absolutely love.
I love that
And
one too. I've got that, and then we've got this one too, that the artist
yeah,
who did
oh,
my story
I
did.
haven't
So
got that one. I haven't got that one, but it's signed by Gary Russell as well. So
brilliant,
and
brilliant.
I met Gary, and I
What?
told him that I'd written this story. Yeah, he's a lovely man, and I told him I was writing about Stacey Massard, and I just told him the title, and he said, "You know what? Even if the story's rubbish, the title alone is absolutely brilliant." So I took that. I thought that was marvelous.
Amazing. What a compliment. I got mine signed by Mark the editor, and also by Anthony. Both of them were so kind and opened up their homes to let me stay when I was in the UK.
Oh,
And
brilliant!
it was so amazing to meet them. And I would love one day I'll have this signed by everybody. That'll
Yeah,
be
that's
so
the
much fun.
goal. That's the whole lot signed. I'll sign it. Send
Oh,
it over to me.
amazing.
No problem at all.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's a weird thing actually. Going to because I go to lots of Doctor Who conventions and walking around, I was accosted by somebody who said, "Can I have your autograph in this book?" And I thought, "Oh, of course you can't. I'm just like a normal Doctor Who fan." And it is very strange autographing things for the first time. You think, "What? How do I autograph it? What is my autograph? Have never done that before. I've been signing on checks and paperwork, to be asked to do that. And of course, you want to do a good job, because I know from personal experience how important it is to get things signed. So, you have to do
Yeah.
a good job. So I think I've perfected my autograph now, but it's strange being asked.
I totally understand what you're saying. I had a member of the Who crew, Mark. He sent, also named Mark. He sent in his annual to me that he bought and asked for an autograph, and I went through that whole process. I was practicing for like an hour, just like figuring out what my autograph would be. And I'm like, if I mess
Yeah,
this up, I'm gonna have to buy another copy. Like, thankfully, I was the
yeah.
first person to autograph it. If somebody else has autographed it, it's like you have
You,
one
you don't,
chance.
I don't I don't want to deface somebody's book,
It
with my
feels
silly
right.
scribble.
It feels like I'm ruining the value of this by like
Yeah.
writing on it, but that's what Mark wanted, and so it went all very successfully. But it
Did
is
you
a
charge
strange
him
thing.
for it though?
No, no, gosh, no.
That's what we're going to do. I'm going to start charging. It's
Yeah,
ten
yeah, yeah,
pounds.
right, right. Maybe once I've written as many stories as you have, I'll start charging. But so yeah, it really is. It's been an amazing experience to be part of this. But spoilers out there. Let's dive
Switch off now.
into the incredible ending of the story. This part of the interview will be for people who've bought the book, or I suppose don't mind the spoilers. So
So
um,
you'll get some inside secrets now. You'll get
yes.
one of the frustrations of being a writer is when you want to use an old character or an old monster, and you think they're going to be perfect for this story, and then you're told you can't use them because of copyright problems. So you think, how am I going to get around that now? If everyone's switched off who don't want to be spoiled about this story, it features the chameleons from the Faceless Ones. Okay, now they were perfect for this role in conjunction with another returning character, which we'll talk about in a minute. So I went through a process of calling the chameleons, who the Doctor actually called the chameleons for the first time. That's not what they were known as. That wasn't the name of their race. And we never knew the name of their race because we just took it as read that we're going to be called chameleons. So they turn up at the end and call themselves the Nowhere Kind, because I thought that if their planet exploded, then what's the point in calling them after their planet, which no longer exists? So they dubbed themselves the Nowhere Kind. Stacey had met them before and called them the Face Lost. And I think that the character that we're going to talk about in a minute, from what I remember, I can't remember my own story, isn't that terrible? I think she'd called them the Survivors. Um, so I had kind of three names for these characters because I couldn't use the chameleons. And I had a line of dialogue in the book where the Doctor goes to say the name chameleons. And I think I've typed it CH, and it kind of trails off because we couldn't actually use their name. And the artwork had to be changed as well because there is obviously a few screenshots of the chameleons, and Richard originally drew the chameleons as the chameleons. Then that had to be done again and had to be completely changed. So they are the chameleons, but we're not allowed to call them that.
That was such a fun reveal, and it's one of those characters. I mean, I'm not going to speak for Big Finish because they have such an amazing backlog of audios that they have probably brought back every character that's ever been on screen for Doctor Who in some way, shape,
Yeah,
or form, or have plans to. But as far as the TV series goes, you're right. That really is an unexplored, kind of gold mine of characters that were introduced and never ever, brought back on the TV series. So that was very, very fun. Do you want to talk about the other old character that you brought back?
it was too delicious an opportunity not to this particular character. She's hugely camp. She's quite evil. She cares nothing about the human race at all, and in fact, all she wants to do with the human race is experiment on them and turn them into, and kind of gene splice them into different life forms. And so she has this idea of transferring, which is the title of the book, the audience in Madison Square Garden at this Space Girls concert to her planet, and she's going to experiment on them. And she's she's stopped in her tracks by the Doctor and Stacey and Sard, and that particular character is the Rani. Now, she didn't enter the story called the Rani. I did a bit of hiding in plain sight with this character. I called it Austina Hirsch, which is an anagram. Now, Alex, do you know what the anagram is? There's obviously the Rani, but what was the Rani's name?
No, I don't. What is it?
Do you know? I don't know how to pronounce it. To be honest, is it Usurus? Eucerus, the
Oh,
Rani.
oh, wow. I'm learning
Anyway,
stuff today.
it
This is
was an anagram.
amazing.
Ostina Hirsch is an anagram of, I think it's Eurus. I should have looked this up before, shouldn't I? But the Rani. So she was hiding in plain sight because she couldn't resist doing that. But
That,
she poses as the Space Girls tour manager, and yeah, she's using these chameleons to infiltrate the human race, and then she's going to transport all this audience to the um, face lost or the nowhere kinds planet and do experiments on them.
oh, I see. So it's USHAS. So
That's it.
Ushas. Ushas.
I
Wow.
don't know. So yeah,
That is
so
so cool. What a clever little reference.
that's purely because I love doing anagrams. I love changing letters, and to have a character who could be renamed something else so that you don't know who they are until the reveal was too tempting for me.
I mean, that's again in very much in the tradition of the master showing up in the credits as anagrams of the master, or just to hide the character's existence. So that is
I
so cool.
I will be the first to admit that in the back of my head, it's not the Rani, it's actually Missy. But I had to switch it because I absolutely love the character of Missy. Michelle Gomez is absolutely hilarious, and I kind of wanted that flavour. And so that was in the back of my head that I'm kind of writing Missy because she's really camp and she's really evil and she hates the Doctor. Um, but I thought, no, Missy's been done. It needs to be the Rani in this. But it's kind of like a mix between the Rani and Missy.
Right. And the thing about this annual is obviously we did have the restriction that we couldn't reference anything that hadn't happened yet as of 1996,
So it couldn't be
1997.
Missy.
So it couldn't be Missy. But
Yeah.
I do, I would love to see, possibly an annual that is done where, all of the writers just get to like in, completely mix together new series with classic series. And I personally love that. I think that, Doctor Who is it's a show about change, and it is constantly changing, and the fact that we classify it as classic series and new series, that if you look at the subcategories from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s to each Doctor to each season, it's so different that it's almost you're whenever you're talking about the any of the series as a whole, you're painting with broad brushstrokes. You're possibly just being inaccurate in general because you're talking about so many different things that I love when we get to just say that Doctor Who is this complete universe, and the reason it's been able to survive so
Time
long is
travel show. So
right, right.
anything can
So
happen.
anything can happen, and the reason that it's survived so long is because it doesn't have a singular author writing it. um,
Mm.
but the kind of lack of payoff there is that it can feel less like its own complete universe because you have so many different writers writing for it, and we're all contradicting each other and saying different things, and like you're saying, it's a time travel show. But I love it when we're able to combine it all and say, okay, this classic Doctor would have met this new monster that didn't exist yet because it hadn't been written, but it's so much fun to combine those. What are some of your favorite either combos that you've gotten to write for or that you want to write for? You mentioned Missy and the Eighth Doctor, but are there any others that you want to combine? Like, I think it'd be hilarious for Strax to meet the Third Doctor and then to just like fight it out.
I actually have an unpublished story where Missy meets the Cybermen, and she's really horrible to them. I mean, really horrible. She sees them as an inferior race, and there's a scene where she's actually walking over sort of shards of Cybermen in her stilettos, which again is so camp, but it just lends itself to that character and those monsters. So you could go anywhere and do anything. I was overjoyed to write a story about David Bowie. I mentioned it earlier, Scary Monsters, and that came from Graham being a cancer survivor and being so upset that David Bowie actually died of it. And the end line of that story, which I had before I actually wrote the story itself, was the doctor was Graham saying, you know, why does this horrible disease take away some brilliant men? And the doctor says to Graham, well, sometimes it leaves brilliant men behind as well. And that's, you know, that line was the start of the story. So
Wow.
it was a joy to write that. But you can have any character from any time in history and any monster, any companion. It's a time travel show. You can do what you like. The only limit is your own imagination, as far as Doctor Who's concerned.
Absolutely. I mean, so well put. And what age did it capture your imagination at?
When I was terrified at the age of, what was I? Was I about 4 or 5 when I saw the sea devils coming out of the water for the first time? And do you know what? Daleks, Cybermen, they've never bothered me. Zygons, don't care about those. But it's the sea devils. That first scene of them coming out of the water just scarred me for life. And I remember having a conversation with Louise Jameson about that. And she said, isn't it interesting how children like to be scared? And I said, that's kind of, yeah, that's right. You do get that adrenaline rush by being scared, but also knowing that you're watching it with your parents around you, so you're in a safe environment, but you do like being a bit frightened at the same time.
I mean, what you just summed up there was the almost the crux of the defense that the PR team for Doctor Who has faced for years, which is this show too scary for children? And
Yeah.
back in the day with Mary Whitehouse, like raging against Doctor Who,
Mm.
and you'd have magazine columns and articles where the doctor would respond, the companions would respond, the producer, directors, writers, and other people would jump in and say, you know what, it's either, it, like you're saying, it's a safe environment. I think that, as kids, there might be this sort of recognition that you're a very small human being and you have people taking care of you, but there is that fear that you feel. It's this very strong emotion, and so I think that having some sort of outlet to put that in and sort I think that can be important for some kids to process those feelings and say, okay, it's not the big wide world that I'm scared of, it's a sea devil coming out of the water. And
Yeah, but it's always in the back of your head as well that you know that the doctor's going to stop them and save the
exactly.
day. So
Right,
you're
right.
safe. You're frightened initially, but you know it's all going to be okay in the end.
And it's that famous, line of being behind the sofa or hiding behind the cushions.
Never done that.
The point is, you're still looking out, you're still watching, and you might be
In
hiding
fact,
behind something, but still watching.
ironically, in behind my sofa, I have a huge collection of the complete history of Doctor Who. So I've actually got Doctor Who behind my sofa, which is a bit weird.
Amazing. I have
Oh, I
half
can
of
see.
them, half
Yeah,
of the collection.
yeah.
But in the US, it's harder to collect them. But yeah, and I always thought, like, we always had our like couches right up against the wall, so I never really understood the expression behind the behind the sofa.
Of
But
course, yeah.
it
Sofa
must
couch,
be
yeah.
something with the way actually designs
You
rooms are
could say
designed in the UK.
you could be crouching behind the crouching behind the couch. There we go.
Couch crouching. It's a
That's
new
it.
term.
Perfect.
I mean, so you mentioned the sea devils, coming up out of the water and that sticking with you, forever. Were there any other monsters that felt like that for you, either in Doctor Who or in another show entirely?
My favourite classic Doctor Who story, and probably my favourite Doctor Who story of all time, is the Seeds of Doom. And that I remember I was in hospital watching that for the first time and seeing the progression of the character. I can't remember who it was now, who just gradually turns into this huge plant monster and absolutely terrified the life out of me. And a vulnerable time when I'm in hospital as well, you think, oh, because my parents came and watched it with me. And of course, they left at the end of the Doctor Who episode, and you think, I'm on my own in hospital now. I don't like this. I don't want a plant creature to kill me. Um, that's probably my favorite story. That had a huge effect on me, and indeed most of the Tom Baker stories did, because I was at that time where I was most into the series. And as an older person, I suppose you can be creeped out by lots of things, but I suppose one of the most genius creations has been the Weeping Angels,
Yes.
where literally, they don't move, but as soon as you look away, they do, and there's no escape from them. They send you back in time, which, to be honest, would be quite nice going back in time, but not necessarily to live your life out and then you die. That'd be horrible. But yeah, I think the Weeping Angels are certainly the modern sort of monster that has sort of made the most impression on me.
Right, absolutely. And, as we look at the Weeping Angels and, Angels Take Manhattan, right? A beautiful combination of the two
You
topics.
see how we can complete the circle. This is why you're an expert interviewer, because you just bring everything back.
Oh, thank you. Well, at the time of recording this, we've just recently had the announcement that Stephen Moffat will be writing, has written at this point. The article pitched it like he would be writing it. He's already written it. It's already been made. It's coming out in a few short weeks. But he's written an episode for the new season of Doctor Who. And, looking at that news, I was so excited because at his looking at Stephen Moffat's CV, if you will, his resume for Doctor Who. Obviously, showrunner, wrote a lot of episodes during his time as showrunner. But if you look at just the episodes where he was writing for Russell T Davies, you have The Empty Child and The Doctor Dances, The Girl in the Fireplace. You have Blink. You have Silence in the Library, Force of the Dead. Like, these are all brilliant episodes, and Blink is perhaps one of the most famous Doctor Who episodes, and I think it's hilarious because the Doctor's barely in it.
Yeah,
But it just shows how brilliant, of a writer that Stephen Moffat was, and I think that he's written brilliant episodes for Russell T Davies, and so that combination, I'm thinking, is going to be really, really
it's
good.
going
I
to be
love.
quite delicious, isn't it?
Right. I loved in the article, he said something like there was begging, there was pleading, but eventually Russell agreed to it just to get me out of his garden. Like,
Yeah.
I just love that switch. He makes it sound, because he said before, I'm not gonna write for Doctor Who again. So he makes it sound like it was the current production team and Russell begging him to come back, and then he's like, no,
Stephen
it was
Moffat
me.
lies. We know this.
Yes, the absolute thing you can count on. Forget the Doctor lies that he wrote. It's Stephen Moffat
Yeah,
lies.
totally.
Absolutely. And so, as you mentioned writing previously with the stories that pick up as sort of sequels, if you will, as
Yeah,
with characters that were left. I love that concept, and that idea is very, very cool. In fact, sort of the reverse concept of that has been applied with a new book that's coming out this year in 2024 called The Prequels. And it's all to do with what happened to people and companions and characters before they met the Doctor. What was their lives like before? What was that like for you, answering that question of like what comes after, and sort of picking these characters out? I loved what you mentioned with following up with Samantha Briggs again from the Faceless Ones. But what were some of the other characters? Because I think was that the one you said you wrote 15 stories for, or was that a different one?
I just found I couldn't stop. Once I started, they had a story list of every episode that was still available, and so I went through that and thinking, oh, it would be amazing if I did that particular character. I had Rodan from the Invasion of Time, and I had her character falling in love with Leela, and eventually Leela gets married to, is it Arjun? I can't remember, the one of the Time Lords.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Leela goes off and marries him. And I had Rodan being completely annoyed at this, and then going off to a mountain and looking up at the sky and wishing she was with Leela. And then Leela appears, and she does a ceremony where they essentially they cut each other's palm and join hands, and then they're blood sisters from then on. So it's kind of it's taking those characters and just giving them a new life. And I had Sabalon Glitz and Mel, and Mel was always interfering with Sabalon Glitz's schemes and making them trying to turn him into a better person, and that was kind of more a comedic thing. And I also wrote Harrison Chase, who was
Yes.
famously killed in the Seeds of Doom. However, his consciousness entered the plant life around him, and he became one with the garden. And it's essentially a horror story, loosely based on Swamp Thing and Man Thing from DC and Marvel. But that gave me the opportunity to write a horror story. So the good thing about the Shadow of the Gallifreyan is you could have many different styles of writing, which really frees you up as a writer. So that was a huge excitement doing that.
That's amazing. I mean, all of these ones, I want to just read the story and see what you've written. So
You
that's so
need to get the
cool.
book. You need,
I
and it's not just.
know.
I mean, the book itself is if you think I've got 15 stories in it, many more stories than that. It's 400 pages. So if you don't like mine, you've got another sort of like 300 odd pages that you can delve into. It's a great book. It's very very good.
That's amazing. Well, we will link to those in the description down below, and of course to the annual as well. Paul, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been such a pleasure. The time has flown by.
It
It is,
has. I can't believe the time. Brilliant.
I
And thank
know.
you so much for inviting me, Alex. I'm sorry this has taken so long to get sorted out, but like I said, real life gets in the way sometimes. And it was such a pleasure talking to you today. So thank you so much for inviting me.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you so much for joining me. Bye.
Bye.